Welcome everyone to the City of Phoenix Public Safety and Justice Subcommittee. Today's meeting, we have with us the Vice Mayor, also Councilmember Williams, and myself. I'd like to call this meeting to order. And do we have any cards from the public?
Chairman, yes, we do. Our first public speaker is Samuel Merton. Mr. Merton, are you on the line?
Hello.
Please proceed.
So since we're talking about police and public safety, I just wanted to take some time to express some of my frustrations with the Phoenix PD and how it's managed. Years ago, the department was reported to be overstaffed and underworked, and nothing proactive seems to have been done about that. Instead, millions of dollars have been thrown at it every year, to the point where, like, this year it was over $700 million. And the department still fails to increase clearance rates. And in 2018, it was reported that the Phoenix PD shot more people than any other department in the nation. So today, we only have 4 things on the agenda for the policy changes for the police department. And I feel like those changes are the bare minimum that should have been implemented anyway. And I hope the council doesn't see these as the end of the changes that we need to address in the Phoenix PD. We're also talking about the police department's role in behavioral health and crisis assistance. I'm not sure that the department that can't solve crimes and has the highest shooting rate should be helping people, should be helping the unsheltered and mentally ill. We need to stop increasing the budget and address why the police department is such a failure in Phoenix. Why would we send the most violent police department to help the most vulnerable people? We need to hand that work off to professionals who are trained and passionate about that type of work. And I hope some of the programs that we talk about in behavioral health are part of that.
Thank you so much, Samuel. Is there somebody else, another card?
Yes, our next speaker is Walt Gray. Mr. Gray, are you on the line? Oh, I'm sorry, he's not on the line any longer. Our next speaker is Amy Meglio.
Hello, my name is Amy Meglio, and I wanted to take some time today to discuss the 2019 Phoenix Metro Police Medal of Merit recipients. And I want to ask some questions. So the incidents that I'm going to talk about for each officer with a badge number are on top of newspaper archives and filed cases with the government. So this doesn't even include any disciplinary personnel info. So I'm curious as to why the city in 2019 issued any of these officers, more than half of them, awards of merit. Officer Kyle Frick, badge number 7937, on 3/13/2019, was one of 2 officers involved in shooting and killing an unarmed man in a case of mistaken identity. He was put back on the streets. On 1/21/2020, Officer Frick murdered another unarmed individual, also mistaken identity. This time it was a teen. Why did we give him an award for merit? Or why did the city of Phoenix do that? Officer Andrew Carlson, badge number 6195, 3/13/2019, the other officer involved in the Rivera murder. Why did the city give him a Medal of Honor? Officer Brian Othman, number 9271, on 11/21/2013, he had a department misconduct complaint by a fellow officer. In 2010, he attacked an injured Black Good Samaritan and council member at the time, Johnson, who was saving a man from a fire and was paid to go on leave during investigation. Why is the city issuing him an award of merit and honoring this behavior? So this is showing the toxic culture and how the city is further enforcing it by awarding these badge numbers. Officer Francisco Barrios, number 8920, on 3/2/2017, he shot and killed a man and was put on desk duty. They put him back on the force in 8/23/2019, wrongful arrest of an attorney who was protesting inhumane immigration issues, found guilty of racial profiling. 9/16/2019, named by a prisoner in a petition filing for misconduct. Why did the city of Phoenix issue him an award of merit in 2019? Officer Andre Wesson, badge number 9696, 4/1/2018. He shot and killed 58-year-old suspect John Wessler during a foot chase. And 2000. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy, and is there anyone else?
Yes, there's one more speaker, Marcus Reed. Mr. Reed, are you on the line?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Can
Yes.
hear you loud and clear.
Okay. The reason why I'm here is, the same reason that I always come is I really like to see the Phoenix police be put in check. I don't really have a lot of written comments today because I feel like I've said the same thing over and over and over again. But yet I go and I watch the news. I hear from fellow people out on the streets, just the way that the Phoenix police are treating people with absolute no regard to their rights, specifically, people that are out there trying to protest with their First Amendment rights. It seems like they are treating Black and brown people and people that are protesting Black and brown initiatives a little bit differently than they are the white people out there that are protesting that President Trump has won the election. While those people stormed the election office with guns blazing, not one person was charged, not one person was followed home, not one person is under the threat of constant surveillance, while as the Black and brown people that were protesting the police violence that the Phoenix police puts on all of us out on the streets are treated with absolutely opposite. So, I am here today because I am really wanting to see some absolute measures change with the Phoenix Police Department and see that they are held accountable for the actions, specifically, not allowing people to go out there and use their First Amendment rights. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcus. Is there any other cards out there?
That was the last speaker for public comment, sir.
All right, thank you, Matthew. So we're on the approval of the minutes of October 14th. Do we have a motion?
Motion to approve.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a second. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? The ayes have it, so motion is approved. We have a consent action plan, basically the intergovernment agreement with ASU for services. Matthew, do we have any cards on that?
Yes, sir, we do. It looks like 4 speakers on item 2.
Alrighty. Can we go ahead and listen to the speakers?
Yes, sir. Our first speaker is Bhakti and Barasan.
Yep, thank you for having me. I'm here to speak on this item, and I wanted to say that there was a 2011 efficiency study from Berkshire Advisors that advised that Phoenix PD was overstaffed and underworked. They recommended that hundreds of positions be cut just by addressing shifts where there were too many officers patrolling and extra staff. Just small changes that wouldn't leave the department without adequate staff. Since then, the budget has actually increased by $200 million in the past 10 years, hitting $745 million this year. Crime rates have increased, clearance rates have decreased. So rather than improve efficiency and address the use of excessive funds, Phoenix PD has been using those extra funds to continue lining their pockets, and they're justifying spending by taking actions like overstaffing peaceful protests, etc. Taxpayer funding is being used to fund a police department that does more harm than good for Black and brown folks. Why do we continue to fund inefficiency at the expense of our lives? 52% of Phoenix's general budget or $592 million is going towards the Phoenix PD's budget. Community and economic development, on the other hand, only gets $40 million, less than a tenth of what the police department gets from that one source. Why does Phoenix PD need $16,500 more dollars to help assess practices in conjunction with ASU when they already have a $3 million oversight budget? If training and assessments were the solution, Phoenix PD would not be one of the most violent in the country, shooting more people in 2018 than any other department nationally, even including New York City PD, which has 7 million more residents. Reform isn't possible. It's time that we address the underlying issues with Phoenix PD and bring community members into discussions that impact our lives. Until we have a part in the safety of our community, nothing will change. That was all. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any questions? Can we go to the next speaker?
Yes, sir. The next speaker is Camille Johnson. Ms. Johnson, are you on the line?
Hi, yes, I am. This request for Phoenix Police Department to partner with the Arizona Board of Regents and ASU may look innocuous on the surface, but once you really think about what this entails, the reasonable thing to do is oppose this proposal. ASU students doing research to further legitimize Phoenix PD's violent practices is an inappropriate use of students' time and would just cause further harm to the community. Requesting to enhance data collection and reporting through this program seems unnecessary when Phoenix police are already using the Arizona Counterterrorism Information Center to spy on members of the public. They have all the information they could possibly want at their fingertips, and they don't even have to obtain it through the normal legal channels. Finally, claiming that this proposed partnership would ensure law enforcement procedures assessed are aligned with best practices seems like a waste of time, given that PPD always claims in their bias critical incident briefings and police reports that everything they do is completely justified. Using funds out of this proposed partnership is not a good use of resources, given that they could go towards actually beneficial things for the community, like mental health services, low-cost housing, and education. Thank you.
Matt, do we have any other speakers?
Yes, our next speaker is Jisoo Kim. Jisoo, are you on the line?
Yes, I am. Thank you. I'm speaking today as a current ASU student, and I read through this report text and found it to be quite vague. And so this is concerning to me both as a person who cares about government transparency and also as an ASU student. There are many students out there who are very concerned about the power of ASU PD and see them as actors of harassment and brutality, much like any other police force. We know that they have military-grade equipment, which is unacceptable in any context, but especially on a college campus. To give any more money to ASU or ASU PD here is very difficult to justify. The report text gestures at putting students to work by funding these research projects, but to me, that's equivalent to tobacco companies funding studies to disprove the relationship between smoking and lung cancer, or oil and gas companies funding studies to disprove climate change. You get the idea. These are further attempts to reform the police that, as many students and the wider community have been saying for quite some time, reform is not possible. The entire system is illegitimate and must go. Thank you.
Any other cards?
Our last card on this item is Marcus Reed. Marcus, are you on the line?
Yes, I am. Cool. Can you y'all hear me, right?
Yes, please proceed.
Okay, cool. All right. Hello, I am also a current ASU student here in Phoenix and downtown campus. I'm asking that you do not allow the city's police force initiatives to be delegated to ASU students. We already know that the Phoenix police need drastic changes. I feel like this is another way for them to slow down any type of incremental change. You know, they haven't already responded to all the other research that they've been involved in. You guys are working on initiatives from research that they got about themselves 10 years ago or something like that, I believe. That may be overstated. But it just seems like the more research you get, the more you realize that the Phoenix Police Department needs a change, which is the more that you guys just continue to sit in these meetings and do absolutely nothing about the Phoenix Police Department. I'm sick of answering questions to my family and relatives about how soon I'm going to get the heck out of Arizona because of how bad the police force is to Black and brown people. I'm sick of trying to tell them that, we are trying to hold them back and, live normal lives without any type of surveillance, but that is beyond the truth. Everybody knows that the one thing that is a thorn in the side of the entire state of Arizona is the Phoenix Police Department. So I'm asking as an ASU student that you don't throw any more money towards this, and you make sure that the Phoenix Police start responding to the research that they already have. Thanks.
Thank you, Marcus. Any other cards, Matt?
Not on this item, sir.
Alrighty, is there a motion for consent item number 2?
Move approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any questions or from my colleagues to staff? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Councilmember?
Aye.
Councilmember Garcia, I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, can we just have staff address what this entails and some of the things that were brought up, just to clarify some of the points that were brought up of what this is?
Absolutely. Is there any staff members that can answer some questions regarding the intergovernment agreement with ASU?
Yes, sir. Chief Williams is coming to the table.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee. I don't believe I heard the question, or if there was a question.
Councilmember Garcia, would you want to restate that question?
Sure. So there were some things said in public comment in regards to what this actually entails. So if you could just give us a quick review of what this means. Is the money going to ASU? Is the ASU money coming to our police department? And what is the purpose of this agreement?
So, Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, Councilman Garcia, so we've been trying to partner with ASU and have been a partner with ASU on a myriad of different studies, from body-worn cameras to actually having a professor assigned to PD to help with various research topics. This money is going to be used to help cover some of the costs of students participating in 3 or 4 different areas. One is to better assess and educate and test what happens during a protest event on the police side and on the community side. Also to help us with enhanced data collection and reporting, and to make sure that we are in line with best practices across the country. We thought it was important to have an academic end to that, because in some of these things we did not have the academic piece. I hope that answers a question, Councilman.
Thank you, Chief. Will any of this data be used to criminalize or prosecute or do any of that with protesters?
Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, and Councilmember Garcia, no. This is just to better educate us on, and let me give you a good example. Dr. Ed McGuire has been listed as one of the subject matter experts in crowd control and protesting. The thought process would to have ASU students and Dr. McGuire on the ground to give us information about better tactics that we could use, some of the things that spark some of the changes in the protest crowd and behavior, so it would not be used for prosecution.
Any other questions for my colleagues? Seeing that there's none, thank you so much, Chief. So we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. Now we're on item number 3, which is on police use of force policy change. I believe we have a presentation on this.
Yes, sir. Sorry about that, Mr. Chairman. I thought I was off the hook for 2 seconds. So good afternoon to everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to share with the Public Safety Subcommittee and the public changes in policies that have been made over the course of this summer. Next slide, please. As many of you know, with the death of George Floyd, that sparked public outcry against law enforcement. The technique that was used on him was called the carotid control technique, and in June of 2020, we eliminated this use from our policy as well as from our training. Over the course of the summer and in talking to other law enforcement agencies and talking to community members, we found it important to implement the duty to intervene in September of 2020. So the duty to intervene, by example, is if Jerry Williams and Mike Kurtenbach are on scene and I am using more force than I need to, Mike Kurtenbach has a responsibility to tell Jerry Williams to stop doing what I'm doing and then contact a supervisor. We did have the duty to intervene as a component of our policy, but we moved it up in the policy and made it more stringent, and it also coincides with the preservation of life standard, which was also previously in our policy. Next slide. Also in 2020, realizing that our employees all have a responsibility that if someone is in need of care or aid prior to fire getting there, that we are having the duty to render aid and provide medical treatment, whether that medical treatment is rolling someone over, if it's applying pressure, we're working our way through that. And we've had 20 officers volunteer to go through the EMT officer training, which is a 40-hour block of training. And then in 2021, we'll have 3 classes of 20 people who will do it also. And with each of these policies, just as a reminder, we have training that follows it on an e-learning line, as well as some of that will be in person. At the bottom of the screen, you see that the deadly force and the use of vehicles as deadly force and or shooting at moving vehicles. We've changed and adjusted the policy to make it only permissible in extreme and life-threatening circumstances and situations, and employees are not supposed to place themselves in the path of a vehicle, thereby forcing shootings at times to happen. We had this as an e-learning module, and we can also follow it up with in-service training if necessary. With that, that concludes my presentations. I am open to questions if you have any.
Any questions from my colleagues?
Chairman?
Yeah, Councilmember Garcia.
Thank you. Thank you, Chief. On the cardioid control technique, I know that we're working on the 9 can wait, and that policy recommends banning all chokeholds and strangleholds. Why did we just ban one technique and specifically this technique? And are we looking to ban all of them?
Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, Councilman Garcia, that's a great question. I was on a national call yesterday that talked about not only the carotid control technique, but there are also some other techniques that manipulate the neck and cut airflow and oxygen. So in our tactical training detail, we're making sure that we're reviewing those to make certain that that's not a part of the carotid control technique. But on the national call, it was very clear and evident among my peers, as well as you saw here in policy, that that carotid control technique was something that needed to go. Over the course of the summer, Arizona State University and Dr. McCoy, who's one of the surgeons and specialists there, talked us through as a command team about how if you're going to have a carotid control technique in your policy, you have to have extensive training and folks have to be spot on with how they're applying the carotid control technique. So it was in the best practice and in the best area to do away with that carotid control technique, keeping in mind too that we need to look into other neck holes and putting those things in the national call that I was on, putting those type of choke holds or neck restraints as uses of deadly force if that's what you're deeming necessary in policy.
Thank you. So we're not closing the door on possibly taking out other techniques, right?
Yes.
Okay. I have like 3 more questions.
Go for it.
Okay, thank you. On the duty to intervene, and this is obviously we saw it literally with George Floyd, and it's our belief that Minneapolis actually had a duty to intervene policy, and that didn't stop George Floyd's murder. So the question is, how are we ensuring that these reforms are implemented on duty? And I would also ask, are we providing protections for officers that decide to stand up for what's right? And then also, what does accountability look like if officers don't perform their duty to intervene?
Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, Councilmember Garcia, so you asked 3 different questions. The first one is, how do we ensure the implementation is being followed? We follow it up with training, we follow it up with squad briefing, and thankfully, we follow it up with review of body-worn camera also. So you can't just have a policy and not train your employees on that policy and give them time to absorb that policy. So we're constantly reviewing that and looking at that. Also, we can add those functions into our tactical training detail and in any annual modules that the officers go to, as well as continuing to reinforce the good behavior and not applying the correct, and being able to intervene through 5-minute briefing topics. So if Jerry Williams and Milton Dehoney are in a briefing, the very start of my briefing, we can have a kind of menu of things that the employees would review prior to going on shift, and this could be one of those many reviews. Did that answer that question?
Yeah.
Okay. And the second question you asked, Mr. Councilmember Garcia, was a protection for the officers who come forward and say that they've seen something that was inappropriate. We actually have that happen sometimes in the police department, and that protection is given through personnel rules. That protection is given through notices from Professional Standards Bureau, notices from supervisors to make sure that we're protecting the employees who come forward. That would be very easy for us to add into an e-learning module just to remind employees that we want you to do the right thing at the right time for the right reason. So we can follow that up with an e-learning module, sir. And then the third question was, what do we do with officers who act inappropriately? Was that the third one?
Yeah, that don't perform the duty to intervene.
Right, so that's part of a PSB investigation, or Professional Standards Bureau, investigation that could go through the Use of Force Board, that could be mitigated at the supervisor level with discipline, progressive discipline, as well as follow it up with accompanying training.
Thank you. On the medical treatment, I think this is great. We've obviously had some recent incidents that bring this to mind. From what information we have, 11 officers have been trained since August. Have more been trained? And what is the plan to make sure that officers get the training, but are also, can actually implement this piece of the medical treatment? What is there partnerships with fire or other folks, or what does that look like?
So, Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, Councilmember Garcia, what it looks like is providing equipment for those medically trained officers to have a quote-unquote go bag, that if they're called to a scene or something happens, they have what they need to do to help them bridge the gap between between us assessing and fire's arrival. What we're also talking about, and we had this discussion in command staff last week, was giving officers just a basic kit that can do a couple of different things. So if you have a gunshot wound, being able to apply that pressure with a gunshot wound, and we're working our way through partnerships through the Police Foundation in order to give our employees just that small compression tool or gauze or something in the event they have a shotgun or firearm wound to their chest. If memory serves you all correctly, I believe we came to you maybe 6 or 7 months ago about the Police Foundation providing tourniquet kits to all employees. We have found those to literally be lifesavers. In one instance, in the last 6 months, after a police-involved shooting, the shooter officer was able to apply a tourniquet to the subject who had just pointed a gun at them. So we're trying to figure out ways to make sure our employees have the tools that they need, while at the same time not overstretching them to the point to where it becomes a liability issue. But Councilman Garcia, I agree with your assessment. We sat through a meeting where we realized that some type of medical treatment should be provided just out of humanity, and we're moving towards that. Hopefully that answers that question.
Yep. And then the last one on the deadly force and vehicles, I know we're having to do mostly e-learning videos, and that's how we're moving forward with this. How has that been going? Do you feel if it's effective to do the videos and that officers are grasping the information? Obviously, we also had a recent case where we had an officer jump in front of a moving car with 2 teens in it that forced a shooting. And so similar question, you answered with PSB earlier, but is there differences also in how we hold folks accountable? And also, the last question is, does PSB and the current systems we have of accountability, how do they get the information that we're changing policy and that they need to look at these instances in a different way now?
So let me answer the last question first, because I'll probably forget what you asked me on that one. So how do we reinforce what's going on with PSB in our policy procedures, changes, and process? So we come up with best practices, or we learn something new about a policy and procedures from someplace else, for an example. And then we look through our own current system to see if we have those components in place. If we don't, we add those into policy, and then policy goes through a process internally in the department. So PSB gets a copy of the policy. PSB then sends a copy of that policy out to all employees, to include labor organizations, for our employees to weigh in on the policy. In some instances, and we're going to try to pilot this with the foot pursuit policy that's coming up, we would give that policy to community members for them to weigh in on a policy. Also, I do want to put a pause here too. So when we were developing the body-worn camera policy, we did have community member input in that. But after speaking with the Center for Policing Equity as a thought partner in this process, we're realizing that we need to involve community members more in our policy changes and adjustments. So the foot pursuit policy will be an offshoot of that. But to answer your question, PSB takes the new policy, runs it through the system, and then after a 2-week period of time, if there are changes and adjustments, then we as management go through those changes and adjustments, and then it becomes policy. We've been very careful since my tenure here of making sure when we change those policies, we notify mayor and council to keep you all in the loop on what's going on, as well as becoming more transparent and letting our community know the changes in policy. And I don't remember, Councilman, what the first question was, other than how are they, oh, I think I remember. How are folks grasping the new changes in policies to talk about the shooting up moving vehicles? Oftentimes, or sometimes in policy, we change policy or make it more stringent based on a scenario and circumstance that didn't necessarily go the way that we wanted it to. This was an example of that. We realized in that officer-involved shooting that there were some training issues and some policy decisions that needed to be made, and instead of waiting for someone to tell us to make those decisions, we changed and made those decisions for us. So the constant e-learning, which is required, and employees are going to have to say that they've attended the training, watched the training, reinforced by supervisors, reinforced by lieutenants, and then again reinforced when folks come down to our annual training academy for module, and or the tactical training detail goes to the precincts and to the bureaus to train employees firsthand. So hopefully that answers all those questions.
It did. Thank you.
And then we have some questions for the vice mayor.
Yeah, I think I was more comments than questions. But I would like to thank the Chief Jerry Williams for her leadership in bringing forward these important changes to our police department. I think it is important to note that these recommendations come from the work of U.S. Conference of Mayors Committee on Police Reform and Racial Justice, with Chief Williams served during this past summer. I'm very thankful for all the work that you have done, Chief, and making sure that you and I had this conversation a few months ago where we're thinking about how we want to reimagine our police department and the different things that we want to do moving forward, right? How is it, that we keep our community safe, at the same time, making it easy for our police officers to come out and be able to talk about how they feel, and making sure that we have a real comprehensive plan on how do we deal with folks that are going through a mental crisis. How do we feel, how do we deal with that? And it sounds like, there's a lot of steps that are being taken into that. So I'm very appreciative of that, and hoping to be able to continue to work with everyone, and we can continue to implement changes that are going to be good for the community and good for our police department. Thanks, Chief.
Any other questions for the chief? Seeing none, is there a motion?
I don't believe this item was posted for motion. It was just information and discussion.
Information only? Okay. Sorry about that. So then we'll go to item number 4. Is there any...
Chairman, we do have some public comment on this item. On number 3.
Can we go ahead and hear the cards then? Thank you.
You're welcome. So our first speaker is Vanessa De Carlo. Vanessa,
Hello,
are you
can
on?
you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. Any of these policies that are put forth, it's deadly, it's dangerous to people. I cannot even believe that this is going forward as a viable option when it could end in a very deadly outcome for people. It's incredibly upsetting and infuriating that this is even on the table. Shooting at cars, the sorts of holds that we're talking about are dangerous. And this is a dangerous, dangerous, and deadly police force. Like, what are you doing? It's just so upsetting. Okay. Also, regarding the political prosecution and the collusion with MCAO, when we're looking at PPD and MCAO had developed an opportunistic partnership in a desperate attempt at political gain. PPD is invested in silencing community voices continually. Since 2010, I reviewed all of these records, and looking back, community voices are continually silenced. Calling to defund their violent agency and MCAO is colluding. These two agencies and their partnership is totally corrupt. We see this exemplified in the countless cases where judges have refused to charge people based on police reports lacking probable cause, and then MCAO brings the same charges to grand juries for indictment. In recent protests against police violence, PPD arrested 3 children and a dozen people who are facing felony street gang charges and could be sentenced to years in prison. These are the sorts of people we are working with. Unacceptable. We cannot move forward having these deadly policies and the way that we are treating community and not listening to community. Since 2010, community has been outpouring their hearts, wanting things to change. I implore you to really make some really serious considerations about this, because this is unacceptable and very, very transparent to the public that we have a huge problem that is not being attended to.
Matt, is there any other speakers?
Yes, sir. Our next speaker is Sarai Richter.
Hello there. Banning the one chokehold is a very bare minimum. The Phoenix PD is one of the most violent departments across the United States, and they are embedded in a culture of a shoot first mentality. Since 2011, these increasing incidences have gone up by 1,000%. The cops shooting civilians. Most shootings happen within less than 3 minutes upon arrival of the scene. That tells us that they're not using de-escalation techniques. Statistics state that over about every 4 days, there's a cop pulling a gun on a civilian here in the Valley. When the Police National Foundation came to Phoenix in 2018, they recommended that there be an alternative to police interactions when it came to supporting individuals in mental health crises, and that cops in Phoenix were not suited to answer these calls. This advice has not been taken seriously, and today we need community now more than ever to be involved in decision-making processes and community and accountability to oversight. We are paying for this with our lives. I yield.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Lily Villa. Lily, are you on the line? I'm sorry, she's no longer on the line. Our next speaker is Bruce Franks. Bruce, are you on the line? Bruce, are you on the line? Oh, I'm sorry, he's also not on the line. Our next speaker is Ben Laughlin. I'm sorry, Mr. Laughlin is also not on the line. Our next speaker is Camille Johnson. Camille, are you on the line?
Yes, hi, thank you. Look, changing use of force policies is great and all, but let's not pretend that officers will actually follow them. Eric Garner was killed by an NYPD officer who used a banned chokehold. And chokeholds won't even be fully banned within Phoenix PD. Chief Williams just said that neck restraints can still be used. This is clearly a farce. Having policies like duty to intervene, medical treatment, and deadly force related to moving vehicles are useless when Phoenix PD shoots to kill at the slightest reaction from people they're confronting. The Phoenix Police Department has shown over and over again that they are the deadliest police department in the country. These piddly reforms will do nothing to stop them harming Black, Brown, and Indigenous community members at disproportionate rates. And to add insult to injury, PPD, along with the help of the Maricopa County Attorney's Office, treats people in the community who speak up against their unjust behavior like gang members. Charging protesters with gang charges is absurd. If you want to break up an actual gang, go after the Phoenix Police Union, please. They've sent their minions to make comments on the agenda to tell you, council and vice mayor, that you need to submit to their authority and run any police policies by them first. How can you not see that you're being strong-armed by these wannabe mafiosos? Council members, you are representatives of the public, not the Phoenix Police Department. I find it really hard to believe that there was community involvement in this because Phoenix community members don't want reform. We've been saying for a while now, defund the police. I yield my time.
Our next speaker is Paris Wallace.
Hi there, this is Paris Wallace. I am the director of Black Phoenix Organizing Collective, and this is a wild conversation. The description that Williams just provided, you want ASU students to be used as spies. That's what I took away from that comment. And also, I'm very happy to know that another community member has taken note of those officers that have, for whatever reason, gotten medals of honor. And I want to add one more real quick. Joshua Adams, badge number 6876, who was actually on the Brady list twice, received the Medal of Life Saving, and is currently still employed. There's a list of over 100. So while I'm really commenting, we've been talking a lot about PPD's violent treatment of protesters and are consistently being ignored. These arrests are unnecessary, and every single judge involved agreed because they were all dismissed. Despite that, PPD has made hundreds of arrests. On one night, they actually arrested over 200 people for marching against police violence. Now, let's look at the agreements that this department made at the beginning of the pandemic. They agreed to cite and release people, but looking at what they actually did, they put hundreds of people in jail and potentially created a super spread. So I just want to point that out. Also, this city and the police have wasted over $12 million in taxpayer dollars by saturating peaceful marches with expensive equipment and hundreds of extra officers, noting that our people are brave enough to protest this treatment and are being targeted, attacked, and caged in an attempt to silence us. Now, let's look at the treatment of the Trump supporters at the recorder's office. The red tape that was rolled out for white supremacy was a clear, biased message of anti-Black sentiment that, first off, there's a fenced-off First Amendment zone and street traffic closed. I yield.
And our next speaker is Amy Meglio.
Yes, hi, thank you. First off, on this number 3 item, I'd like to thank Council Member Carlos Garcia of District 8 for just embodying what a representative of the public should be, and for being the only engaged, concerned representative of the people as we discuss these life and death, racially disproportionate matters. And to ask Councilmember Nowakowski if his soda tastes good. I mean, that was almost meme-worthy as concerned citizens are talking about their at-risk lives. Now, regarding the carotid control technique and duty to intervene, I mean, I'm not saying don't pass it, but congratulations on these performative, empirically ineffective actions, I guess. Reviews of bans on neck restraints in some of the nation's largest police departments have already found them largely ineffective, subject to lax enforcement, and that oftentimes, as we see here, as you guys did, When some chokeholds are specifically banned, a variation of the neck restraint is still permitted. When we look at neck restraints that fall into two broad categories, you have the chokehold and the stranglehold. According to Lorenzo Boyd, director for the Center of Advanced Policing at the University of New Haven, the bottom line is that you're cutting off somebody's air supply or the blood flow to their brain, and eventually they're going to be incapacitated. Some of the biggest police departments in the country have already instituted these bans on chokeholds, and as Council Member Garcia, thank you so much, already brought up, you know, we've seen these sort of policies implemented before the death of George Floyd, of Eric Gardner. So, you know, just like HR policy at any company, a policy is only good as somebody's willingness to implement it. And I don't know how safe I feel with Chokehold Jerry, you know, at the helm of directing people when they can and cannot use these chokeholds. Especially since before she even got here, we were already the fourth most murderous police force in the nation. And the FBI data finds their ability to solve crimes laughable with their 11% clearance rate for rape. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Patricia Pegliuca.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello. Great. Thank you. Public servants, I, like you, have enough privilege to be here today. I'd like to speak for those who can't take 2 hours off in the middle of a workday and those that are actually impacted by all of the decisions that you're making. It is unacceptable, though completely unsurprising, you're holding the Use of Force Subcommittee and the OAT meeting tomorrow during work hours. It is abundantly clear you do not value Black lives or the needs of the community members it is your job to serve. These use of force policy changes are truly pathetic, and we all know how ineffective they are. How can any of you in good conscience pretend that these lukewarm remedial changes are a method to stop Phoenix PD's penchant for violence? We have to write a policy stating you cannot choke a person to death, and a policy that, quote, requires all employees to intervene when they know or should know another employee is using unreasonable force. It is so disturbing that that actually needs to be stated in policy. And even worse, that we know this policy absolutely cannot and will not change the violent culture of Phoenix Police Department that breeds the mentality that murdering citizens and not intervening is acceptable in the first place. My use of force recommendation for true civilian safety is to abolish the police. So sure, go ahead and vote yes on these paltry measures that are just barely scraping the bottom of the barrel of bare minimum human decency. We are not impressed. City Council, Mayor, Chief Jerry, we are watching you and building community power to grow leaders that are worthy of your seats. Phoenix PD, stop killing and caging Black people. Stop charging protesters with street gang charges. Council, stop supporting these egregious use of force with your silence and complicity. Thank you.
And our last speaker on this item is Heather Hamill. Ms. Hamill, are you on the line? Chairman, she is not on the line, and that was our last speaker on that item.
Alrighty, any other comments from my colleagues? Then we'll go on to item number 4. We're talking about Phoenix Police Department's behavioral health response approach.
Sorry, I was a little late. Can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so one thing came up, Chief, in regards to providing medical assistance. Would that include overdose or drug abuse? And then the second question is, and this is to you, Chairman, and the Chief, there's a lot of comments around the protests and overtime and all those things that have been happening, the gang charges, and it's my understanding that we're speaking about that in December. Is that right?
Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, Councilmember Garcia, yes, the item on protesting is on the December agenda.
And Mr. Chairman, members of the subcommittee, and Councilmember Garcia, I believe your previous question before the protest question was, do we have a duty to render aid or intervene if someone is having a medical issue and then they're not a police officer? Is that what I understood you to say?
Yes, and particularly if it comes to drug abuse or drug overdose.
And I didn't hear that last part. Oh, drug overdoses. Okay, thank you. Thanks for that, boss. Councilmember Garcia, so we do have employees or officers armed with Narcan in the event we do find folks that have overdose issues, and we've had a number of saves. At this moment, I couldn't tell you how many saves that there were. Also, to the point about mental health, and I don't think you mentioned that, we've been able to offboard 3,000 calls for service into the mental health system so PD doesn't have to respond. So we're always going to look at ways to better mitigate those persons who either have a mental health crisis and or a drug crisis. We'll be working closely with fire. I'll be contacting the fire chief sometime in the next couple weeks to talk about ways for us to better intervene with folks who are having a mental health crisis and or drug crisis on the street.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Chief. We'll go on to item number 4.
Good afternoon, Chairman Nowakowski and members of the subcommittee. My name is Sean Patrick Conley, and I'm super grateful to be able to talk to you today about something we're really proud of and worked on hard for the last 18 months, and that's the Phoenix Police Department's behavioral health response approaches. As we're all keenly aware, next slide. As we're all keenly aware, mental health and behavioral health in our community is a significant issue. It impacts families, it impacts quality of life. It also impacts public safety responses. We have responded to more than 2,000 behavioral health related calls per month. We are a treatment-first police department, and what that means is in collaboration with behavioral health entities, we strive to direct people to treatment before incarceration or jail. We seek to decriminalize the disease of mental illness. What this requires is a non-traditional police response. The approaches that I'll discuss today focus on shifting and sharing the responsibilities that law enforcement has with the behavioral health industry. We believe that the behavioral health industry has the root cause solutions for everybody related to mental health and behavioral health. The goal overall with all of these approaches we've worked so hard on is to increase the response and connection to these resources. Next slide. The first one, and you heard Chief Williams allude to it a little bit, we're really proud of this. It's being incorporated nationally, and it's our 911 Behavioral Health Deflection Program. We initiated this in February of 2019. It involves a dynamic partnership with behavioral health professionals, specifically the Crisis Response Network. We have dispatched more than 2,000 calls in 2020 to the Crisis Response Network. And as you heard Chief Williams say, we're over 3,000 calls since February of 2019. In addition to this, the Crisis Response Network provided each one of our 911 operators with very meaningful training related to the identification and ability to communicate with people on the other end of that line that have mental health challenges. The gist of this deflection program is we don't want to send a police officer to something that doesn't involve a crime or public safety. And so we deflect those calls to a caseworker or a clinician. Crisis response triages it and then makes the determination whether to send out a crisis response team. So we think it's a wonderful program. The second approach, Chief Williams very wisely early on in 2019 signed on with the International Association of Chiefs Police One Mind campaign. This is an award-winning evidence-based national program. We are tremendously committed to it. We have trained more than 800 of our officers, predominantly our officers in patrol. We seek to train every one of our members. However, COVID and the impacts of 2020 have slowed that. The reality of this training is it provides every officer what we call mental health first aid. It allows them to recognize, communicate with, and then have awareness of those resources in that treatment first approach to connect them to services. Next slide. We also believe that answers are in the community. We aggressively seek input and listen to our community. We personally, and I was involved in this, as was our Community Engagement Bureau, met with every advisory board and every advisory board leader, in addition to other community members, and sought input on what type of training they would like to see related to behavioral health. One of the focuses of the advisory boards and the community groups we had met with was a focus on youth. And so with that, we took that recommendation and we have trained every one of our school resource officers in adolescent mental health training in coordination with the National Association of School Resource Officers, in addition to some other ones that we can talk about. You should stay there. Smart notifications for first responders. Again, we like to focus on national best practice models. This one's brilliant in a lot of ways. It's voluntary, and I think that's really important for everyone to understand. But what it does is, in talking to community and families that have been suffering from family members who have behavioral health issues, is they wanted a way to preload information into our systems to let us know that, hey, when I'm responding to this address, Sean Conley suffers from mental illness, and he may be stemming, and he's not high on drugs or behaving criminally. So we're looking forward to being able to get this accomplished. COVID has slowed it a little bit here at the end of November and into December. This did involve a very vibrant partnership with ASU. Next slide. So our crisis intervention teams are an incredibly innovative national best practice program also. What makes us unique as a major city is we have 2 full-time dedicated CIT squads, and that is their sole purpose and mission. 90% of all sworn officers in our organization have completed the basic CIT training, and more than 500 sworn are CIT certified, with 300 plus of those being in the patrol division. We believe that the CIT approach is incredibly meaningful, as it provides that communication with behavioral health entities and affords officers a different type of mindset when looking at behavioral health. We also believe that it's important to have a coach on the field. And so we have embedded a CIT clinician with the crisis intervention teams. And we feel that this CIT clinician has the ability to help navigate back-end behavioral health systems for our CIT detectives and our CIT officers. We initiated this in 2019. The clinician is assigned to the CIT teams in partnership with Crisis Preparedness and Recovery, who's another entity that provides us with some of our in-service psychological wellness programs. One of the things I wanted to add too, back to the Deflection program, we have also embedded a coach on the floor now in partnership with Crisis Response, where there's a clinician with the 911 operators on the floor helping them work through behavioral health calls on whether to send them to Deflection or not. Next slide. The Patrol Crisis Intervention Referral Program. One of the things that we saw we needed to do was establish a really healthy conduit of communication. And that conduit of communication needed to be established from our patrol division officers and our CIT detectives, who then had connectivity to the behavioral health industry. We initiated this in November of 2019, and as of today, we are receiving within those CIT teams approximately 20 referrals from patrol. And why that's so important is a patrol officer can go out to a scene and recognize that there's behavioral health or mental health issues in a family, there's no crime, and then what they can do is send this referral to CIT, and so we don't get to an escalated incident further up the road. Those CIT detectives can work with clinicians to try and connect that family to services. The next one is Handle with Care. Again, another national best practice. What I really like about this program is it focuses on our kids in our schools. This is a partnership with school districts where we completely understand the impact of trauma and trauma-informed care upon our children. And so when children are exposed to trauma in our communities, whether it's witnessing a fatality accident or domestic violence in the neighborhood or whatever, we want to be able to communicate to that school district that when that child arrives at school on Monday and is misbehaving, it's not with a criminal mindset. It's due to that trauma that they had over the weekend. And so we had set up a pipeline of email system to communicate with those superintendents to let them know that Sean would be responding to school after seeing some traumatic incidents. Hopefully then they can de-escalate. The ultimate goal of this is impacting and continuing to work on the school to prison pipeline. Next. There's a lot of conversation in our business about co-responding clinicians embedded with police officers, and there's a lot of pros and cons that we could have a lot richer conversations with. But one of the things we wanted to understand is how we are currently using the 27 mobile crisis teams that the county provides, and are we doing it effectively and efficiently? So in March of 2020, using a data-driven approach, we identified a hotspot in our city that had a higher level of behavioral health-related calls. It happened to occur in the Desert Horizon precinct. In partnership with these mobile crisis teams and the 911 dispatch center, we strove to dispatch these in a more timely and different manner. We provided additional training for our officers. ASU wrapped a research project around it, which was incredibly valuable for us to understand the data, and they provided us with 19 recommendations and things we learned from that project. The biggest thing we learned is that the handoffs from the street environment into the clinician were a lot more efficient and effective, dispatching those crisis teams earlier upstream in the system. And what's really important is this is an ever evolving project and effort. Our staff, in partnership with Phoenix Fire, because we do co-respond on a lot of these, are continuing to assess and evaluate additional options and best practices to best serve our community. That ends my presentation, and I'll take any questions if you have any.
Do we have any questions out there? Matt?
Chairman,
That there's none, yeah, maybe we can take it to the public.
Can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
Okay, we have a question from Councilmember Garcia, then the Vice Mayor.
Thank you. We've seen other cities are moving their crisis intervention teams out of police into fire or other type relationship. What would that look like for us? And then the second question tied to that, on the Behavioral Health Board, what is the makeup of it? Is there representation, particularly of Black, Brown, and Indigenous people?
Councilman Garcia, first and foremost, related to your first question, as it relates to CIT and moving the CIT teams into the fire department, Phoenix Fire and Phoenix PD pride ourselves in a very collaborative relationship. We have had discussions about co-responding with a clinician and a caseworker 3 in what would be like a CR van component, and I think there is some value in that. But we also believe firmly, and as does CIT International, that the approach of having our officers, and I think it's really important to understand, we want to arm them with the mindset and the skill set to understand behavioral health, because they're going to be responding to those. And so I think that there is definitely room for continued discussion and co-location with fire, and I think we're committed to that. If you could repeat your second question, please.
It's just the makeup of the Behavioral Health Board. Is there representation, in particular, of Black, Brown, Indigenous people?
Chairman Nowakowski, members of the subcommittee, and Councilman Garcia, just so I have a deeper understanding, when you say the Behavioral Health Board, we have a cross-disabilities advisory board that we engage with. Is that the board you're referring to?
Yes.
Yeah, so I personally have attended meetings with them, and yes, it is a diverse group. It's one of my favorite advisory boards. They have a lot of different diverse circumstances impacting them, and yes, it is diverse in my opinion.
Okay. And then I had some mostly comments around the handle with care. We've seen school districts, the biggest one, Phoenix Union School District, go away from having SROs on their campus. And I think the comment here is we can't keep asking officers to do what they're not equipped to do. Particularly the piece of being touched by a crime, it's a traumatic experience. And we've seen, and it's proven, that officers don't treat trauma. Counselors, social workers, and our schools do. And unfortunately, they sorely lack those resources at the schools. And so people have continually been asking us to have more non-police responses to mental health. And so I don't think that this is it. This is not what a way we should go. I think maybe having partnerships and trying to find more resources for the schools is a better way to go. And then my final, I guess it's a question. I would want to know kind of the resources that are being spent to implement these approaches. What does that mechanism look like? What does your team look like, or how are these things being implemented?
Chairman Nowakowski, members of the subcommittee, and Councilman Garcia, related to your second question, I think one of the things that I appreciate about these approaches is the majority of this is in kind within the teams. Yeah, there is contractual relationships, and I don't have the specific numbers for you, but we'd be more than happy to get those for you related to our relationship with the Crisis Response Network, with crisis preparedness and recovery on the back end. But the majority of what we've built here comes from Commander Gonzalez's teams in CEB and those relationships. Obviously, we have a commitment to staff the 2 squads of CIT detectives, and so there is a cost for that. The training that was provided to the 911 dispatchers, that was in the relationship and the partnership with the behavioral health industry. The partnership that you saw with ASU and trying to understand how we dispatch, that stuff's all in kind. But I'm more than happy to provide you with some of the costs related to the contracts and the relationships with Crisis Response Network and CPR.
Thank you.
Vice Mayor?
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for that presentation. And I think the crisis intervention team are extremely important to develop, and I am glad to see the work that has been put in already. And I know that Councilmember Garcia asked the question about putting the CITs into the fire department and within the fire department, and we know that's something that's being done in other parts of the city. And I appreciate the conversations that are already being had with our fire department about placing our CITs in the fire department. But I guess my question is, and maybe you already answered this, but what would be the strategy if we did that? Like, how effective would it be if that's the route you guys all decided was the best one?
Chairman Nowakowski, members of the subcommittee, and Vice Mayor, I think one of the things that we would have to do is we'd have to analyze outcomes. I think there are some visions and some ideas, I know in collaboration with the fire department, where we would see in a perfect world a behavioral health van responding to a purely behavioral health call. And I just got to add a caveat if there is a crime in progress or there is public safety or harm to any one of our community members, we're still want a police officer going. But in those situations where it's a purely behavioral health call, where there's an individual in crisis standing on the corner of 19th Avenue and Indian School, I think in a collaborative with Phoenix Fire Department, where we can co-locate, make sure the dispatch is done healthy, and then that behavioral health van or CR van responds with a clinician and a caseworker 3, let's say, or somebody to that effect, you could accomplish some of that. Taking and embedding the CIT detective with the fire department may defeat some of the purposes. I think liken it to spokes in a wheel, and so you would want many of those spokes operating at the same time. We'd still like to keep on with the CIT teams, but I think there is room for us to continue to work and collaborate and reimagine with the Phoenix Fire Department, and we are doing that.
Perfect. Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for that.
You're welcome.
Any other questions?
I have a question.
Yes, Councilwoman?
Are the social workers or other responders in a Phoenix uniform of any kind?
Chairman Nowakowski, members of the subcommittee, and Councilwoman Williams. So if you're referring to our clinicians that are co-responding with the CIT teams, they do wear their polo shirt representing their organization, but mostly they're plain clothes. And we feel that helps because we're constantly in a posture of wanting to de-escalate with people that are in behavioral health crises. So as it relates to that embedded clinician, they're in plain clothes. If you were referring to what in the future would look like a response team going out, we would want them in a soft plain clothes, but I think we want them identified in a professional manner. I don't know if I answered your question.
Well, you kind of did. And I think it's important that when regular citizens see these teams, they can identify that they are part of your organization working in cooperation. And I mean, I wouldn't make it blatant to escalate any situation, but I would think we would need something that said City of Phoenix is part of your.
Chairman
Something
Nowakowski, members
identifying.
of the subcommittee, and Councilwoman Williams, I agree with you. I think whether it's, we've seen great success in how we identify our CIT officers. They wear a different uniform. They have a different placard on their outer ballistic carrier. Our net teams have a different outer carrier, and we've seen great and positive input from the community as it relates to the ability to identify that. And I do agree with you related to the identification of those social workers that are collaborating with us.
Thank you.
And Matt, do we have any cards from the public?
Yes, sir, we do. Our first speaker on item 4 is Walter Gray. Mr. Gray, are you on the line?
Hello?
We can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Two things I'd like to say in regard to item 4. One is that I think there should be more behavioral health people in Phoenix PD, particularly where we have them now. Having just one person working 20 hours a week or 40 hours a week, Phoenix PD is a 24-hour operation, 365 days a year. And I think we, with the success apparently that we're having, it'd be better to have more behavioral health people doing these jobs, and then have some weight against Phoenix police officers, because police officers are not the most lovely kind of people. So I've had encounters with them. So I know there've been small encounters, but I know they're not. They don't assume that you're innocent. So anyway, the other thing is that I would like to ask for a report and analysis of the 44 police-involved fatal shootings in 2018 to see if there were certain squads that had most of those shootings. They could be the inner city squads and the inner city precincts, or there could be some other pattern. And people dispatched and who use force sometimes questionably. So I'd like to ask for that. And those are my 2 points at this time. I tried to call in first on the first time I was called on, but as I tried to speak, I was cut off. So I have more comments when we go back to public comments at the end of the meeting. Thank you.
And our last speaker on this item is Samuel Merton. Mr. Merton, are you on the line?
Yes.
We can hear you.
So I believe these programs, as they're described in the report, fall short of what a crisis assistance program should look like. The police department aren't the ones who should be challenged with providing effective services and care to individuals who suffer from behavioral health issues. We should give that responsibility to professionals who are passionate about that type of work. All the programs listed here seem to be law enforcement based. I don't think that our police department, when we've already gone through all those issues about how they're failing, doing their own jobs of, increasing clearance rates and solving crimes, why would we add this extra layer of duties to them when we can move that responsibility to professionals who are passionate about helping the vulnerable people in our society? I would like the council to consider adding something like the CAHOOTS program in Oregon, which is crisis assistance helping out on the streets. They've been around for 30 years. They send 1 medical worker and 1 social worker to respond to non-emergency type calls that we've talked about in this agenda. They have a guidance and consulting program that they offer to communities that want to replicate their model. Personally, I've been talking to them, and I do have a meeting with them just to go over what that all would be about. It'd be great to have the support of the council on that. It'd be great if other people would look into that. I think that's the type of thing we need in Phoenix, is like a separate crisis assistance team. And that's all I have.
Any other comments from my colleagues? Seeing none, thank you so much for the presentation. And pardon me?
I would like to make a comment.
All right, Councilmember Williams.
I will tell you, in the last year, it has been remarkable to see the changes that the police department has made. They have really listened, I think, to the community, reviewed what's happened in the past, and tried to address it in many different ways. And they're continuing to do that. So I really want to applaud them and thank them for doing that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Williams. With that, we'll go to item number 5, the U visa process. I believe we have a presentation on this.
Chairman, yeah, this is Sean Conley. We do. We're going to have, I'll introduce who I have with me at the table here.
So this is a Sean show, huh?
I guess. Chairman Nowakowski and members of the subcommittee, good afternoon. We're going to bring some information for discussion to you related to the U visa process. With me at the table, I have Commander Tina Gonzalez from our Community Engagement Bureau and Jessica Rothschild from our Code Enforcement Unit. We're going to provide you with a quick overview of the U visa federal program, the role of law enforcement in the federal process, and then our Phoenix PD's process within that federal process. So I'll turn this over to Commander Gonzalez.
Good afternoon, Chairman Nowakowski and members of the subcommittee. I'm going to be providing you with an overview of the U visa program, which is currently being managed by a detective in the Community Engagement Bureau. So the U visa program was created by Congress through the Victims of Trafficking, Violence, and Prevention Act of 2000, and it is there for victims of certain crimes who have suffered physical or mental abuse, and those victims are assisting in law enforcement or government officials in investigating and prosecuting of the criminal activity. The victim must fall under one of the 28 qualifying crime types in order to be eligible, and this can help the victim to be able to feel much safer in reporting these crimes, and especially if they don't have a lawful immigration status. Next slide. So the role of law enforcement overall is to receive the Form I-918 forms, which is a certification form that is submitted to us. The certification then is verifies that the criminal activity actually occurred and that the victim was willing to participate and assist law enforcement. USCIS is the one that actually does the background of each of the petitioners after they are certified by the certifying agency, in this case, Phoenix Police Department. Next slide. So the process that we do with Phoenix is that we, upon obtaining the applications, we certify each one of those to determine the eligibility of the petitioner. This is a two-tiered review process in that we have currently a detective from our community response squad that is reviewing each of the certification applications, and then once the detective determines that the application qualifies and is eligible, a supervisor, either a sergeant or a lieutenant within the Bureau reviews those certifications and signs off on those. Currently, we have from October 2019 to October 2020, we had 5,400 certification requests in that year. Of those requests, 94% were certified. Typically, if they're not certified, it's typically because they do not meet the qualifying crime criteria. And as of now, we are able to process each of those applications within 30 days of receipt. Next slide, please.
I have a question.
Okay, Councilmember Williams.
Could you tell me what are qualifying crimes? Give me some examples.
Chairman Nowakowski, members of the subcommittee, and Councilwoman, yes, there's 28 of them, and the abduction, abuse of sexual contact, kidnapping, murder, rape, sexual assault, those are just a few of those.
Because these are very serious crimes, correct?
Councilman Nowakowski, members of the subcommittee, and Councilwoman, yes, typically they are extremely serious crimes. Domestic violence falls under that, trafficking, things like that.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions from my colleagues?
Yeah, I have a question.
Councilmember Garcia.
Thank you. And thank you for the presentation, and the 30 days is exciting because I know last year we had backed up to 6 months. So I'm glad that's happening. Along with the certification, some of the conversations we've had with immigration attorneys is that they also need the police reports. And so wondering if it's if it's the same office that can either assist to prioritize, or do we think about them in the same way? And then the question will go for folks also that aren't seeking a U visa. Do we prioritize giving back reports for people that might be depending on it in an immigration case or another type of case?
Chairman Nowakowski, members of the subcommittee, Councilman Garcia. Since the Office of Public Records, since our lobby has been closed since April, we have been sensitive to the fact that it has been strictly online. So we do currently have the option for our customers and community members to call a phone number, and they can schedule an appointment to speak with somebody in-house. And if the report is available for release, they can get it fulfilled the same day through the web-based portal.
Any other questions, Councilman Garcia?
No, that was it. Thank you.
All righty. Vice Mayor?
No, not for me. Thank you.
All righty. You know, one of the things that I asked my assistant to do is to call different immigration attorneys, and the biggest concern they had was what Councilmember Garcia stated is providing the police report, that sometimes it takes so long and that they have to go to court on a certain amount of time, and if they don't make it by the court hearing, some of these people are actually deported. So if we can keep to those 30 days and actually have all the documentation that the lawyers need for the U visas, that would be great. I think that was one of the main concerns that people had in the past, that it just took up to 6 months to gather all that information, and their appointments to their court appointments were within 3 months or so. So thank you all for cutting down to 30 days. Anything else from my colleagues?
Chair, Mike,
Yes.
Councilmember,
Yes,
I
Vice Chair.
guess just following a little bit with what you just said about the 30 days. like it would be good for us to get a report on how many reports we were actually asked for, and then how many we actually gave, just so that just so that we can, as council members, some of this stuff is very important, is very important to everyone. And it would be good for us to get a report just to know how many people requested this and how many people actually got it. And the people that have not gotten the reports that they needed, what was the holdback, and what's being done to make sure we that we actually get it done. I guess that's the only thing I would add.
Perfect. With that, do we have any calls from the public?
Chairman, I think that Mr. Gray was hoping to speak. He wasn't able to speak at the beginning of the meeting.
Alrighty, absolutely.
Mr. Gray?
I'd like to ask if that the subcommittee, I agree that police should have a view on use of force and behavioral health. They represent police officers, they're a labor union, they should have a view. So I believe, though, it should be in public. And I ask that we make a public statement about these use of force changes and these behavioral health initiatives. But just keep it public and make it, just keep it public. Also, I'd like to ask for a report. I like this 30-day window. It's really difficult at times dealing with the city to get reports. But the cases of Michelle Cousteau, who was fatally shot by a Phoenix police officer in the first year of Chief Williams' tenure. Had no relationship there, but it happened. That's for the time period. And also there was a person shot fatally by the police in 2015. His name is Ken Cockrell, Cockerel. That should be a top of mind case for the police department. It should be already in the academy. I'm sure it's so hard to get this information out of the police department, but these cases are really top of mind for the police department. And so I asked for that report, and I thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Walt. Is there any other calls to the public?
Chairman, no, there is not.
Alrighty, so is there any future agenda items? I know we talked about the protests. That's coming up. Anything else, Milton?
Mr. Chairman, also in December, we will revisit the street racing item, and then there'll also be a conversation regarding helicopter replacement. And that's
okay.
That's what we have for December.
Already, we have the vice mayor that wants to add something to that.
Yes, I would like to ask for an update from staff on Crime Stop and dispatch, and get a breakdown of call volume, wait times, and reason for calls, please.
I'm sorry, Crime Stop and
Crime Stop and dispatch,
okay.
and get a breakdown of call volume, wait times, and reason for calls.
Yes, we will add that to the agenda as well.
Perfect, thank you.
Any other colleagues would like to add something to future agenda items? If not, this meeting's adjourned. Thank you.